How a billionaire's little adopted daughter helped him escape a massive scheme. There's a hidden eye in your sanctum. The little girl's hushed words, barely a breath, sliced through the morning calm. A millionaire uncovers a treacherous fiancé. Before we delve into this intricate web of deceit and revelation, if you believe in the profound power of truth to illuminate even the darkest corners, please hit the like button. Now let the story unfold. 8-year-old Lily Vance had perfected the art of observation before articulation. In the 3 foster homes that preceded this one, watching had been her shield, her silent tutor in distinguishing genuine smiles from those that masked cold eyes. Now perched at the threshold of Mr. Alexander Sterling's expansive study, she observed again. Her new guardian sat stiffly at his massive oak desk, his face bathed in the cool blue glow of his computer screen. The mid-morning sun, a gentle cascade through tall, arched windows, painted long, dancing shadows across a room teeming with technology that hummed and blinked like a living, digital heart. Alexander Sterling, a man of 35, his fortune amassed from a burgeoning tech empire, barely registered Lily's presence. His fingers danced across the keyboard, a symphony of rapid clicks, as he spoke into his headset. The low murmur of his voice punctuated by terms like quantum encryption and neural network security. To the world, he was a prodigy. To Lily, he remained a distant figure, a benevolent stranger who, for reasons she couldn't fully fathom, had chosen to adopt her. 6 months had passed since she moved into his sprawling estate, and yet she still felt like a transient guest, perpetually on the verge of being asked to leave. Alexander provided everything: a beautiful room, access to the most exclusive schools, a veritable mountain of toys she'd only dreamed of. But his provisions were delivered with the same cool efficiency he applied to his business accounts: distant, well-intentioned, but devoid of warmth. Lily's small fingers traced the ornate molding of the doorway, a silent act of summoning courage. There were things she needed to tell him, unsettling observations that coiled in her stomach like a nervous knot. Yet every attempt to broach a serious topic with Alexander felt futile. He seemed to gaze right through her, as if she were merely another logistical problem to be solved with resources and careful planning. The video conference droned on, Alexander's voice a steady cadence as he discussed firewalls and data integrity with a panel of unseen executives. Lily shifted her weight, a tiny dance of impatience. She'd been standing there for what felt like an eternity, 10 minutes by the ornate grandfather clock in the corner, waiting for him to acknowledge her. Then something within her stirred, a quiet, insistent urge that propelled her forward. Later, she wouldn't be able to articulate the exact catalyst for this newfound boldness. Perhaps it was the way the sunlight glinted off something small and dark, almost imperceptible. Nestled behind the gilded painting, a woman named Victoria had gifted Alexander last month. Perhaps it was the echo of her late mother's voice, a gentle whisper in her memory, reminding her that truth transcended mere politeness. Or perhaps it was simply that 8-year-old hearts possess an innate knowing that 30-year-old minds often forget. Lily walked to Alexander's chair, her small hand gently tugging at his sleeve. He held up a single finger without looking, the universal adult signal for wait. But Lily had waited long enough. She tugged again, more insistently. "Just a moment, sweetie," Alexander murmured, his gaze still fixed on the luminous screen. This time, Lily didn't wait. She leaned close to his ear and whispered the words that would ignite a seismic shift in his world. "There's a camera in your office, but it's not yours." The effect was immediate and visceral. Alexander's fingers froze midair above the keyboard. His entire body rigidified, as if struck by a silent bolt of lightning. The executive on the call continued his monologue about quarterly projections, but Alexander heard nothing save the chilling echo of those 7 words from the small girl beside him. "Gentlemen, I need to call you back," he announced abruptly, cutting off the meeting without further explanation. A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the gentle hum of electronics and the thunderous rhythm of Alexander's own heartbeat. He turned to face Lily, truly looking at her, perhaps for the first time since she had entered his life. Her brown eyes, typically quiet and observant, now blazed with an uncharacteristic urgency. "What did you say?" he asked, though her words had resonated with crystal clarity. There's a camera in your office, Lily repeated, her small finger pointing toward the painting above his bookshelf. Behind the gold frame. I've been watching it blink at night when you're not here. Alexander's gaze followed hers to the expensive oil painting Victoria had insisted on buying him last month. A romantic landscape of rolling hills and vibrant wildflowers. To brighten up your workspace, she had purred, her devastating smile a practiced art form. Every successful man needs beauty in his environment. His mouth went dry as disparate pieces of a horrifying puzzle began to click into place with cold, mechanical precision. Victoria's sudden, almost obsessive interest in his work schedule, her inexplicable habit of tidying his study while he was on calls, the uncanny way she always seemed to know precisely when he would be working late, arriving with coffee and kisses at the most opportune moments. How long have you been watching it? He asked Lily, his voice barely a whisper. Since she hung it up, Lily said simply. I use my tablet to scan for signals when I can't sleep. There are lots of them in the house now, but that one's different. It's not connected to our network. Alexander stared at this small girl who, with a single unadorned sentence, had just upended his meticulously constructed world. In 6 months of shared living, they had barely exchanged a genuinely meaningful conversation. He had provided the finest nannies, enrolled her in the most prestigious schools, purchased every toy a child could possibly desire, but he had never truly listened to her. He had never imagined that behind those quiet, watchful eyes resided a mind sharp enough to detect surveillance equipment that he, a cybersecurity expert, had entirely overlooked. The colossal weight of her revelation began to settle in his chest, a chilling, unwelcome frost. If there was a camera, if someone was watching, if Victoria was involved, the prototype security algorithm he had been developing, a creation potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars, resided on the very computer he used every day in this very room. Lily, he said, and for the first time, he truly saw her, not as a responsibility, not as a charitable endeavor, but as a person, as someone who had just, quite possibly, saved him from a catastrophe he never saw coming. We need to talk. Lily's revelation hung in the air between them, a tendril of smoke from a fire that had just begun to burn. Alexander pushed back from his desk, his mind a whirlwind of implications and possibilities, while the 8-year-old girl who had just potentially saved his empire waited with an unnerving patience. Show me, he finally said, his voice imbued with a newfound urgency. Show me everything you've seen. For the first time since she had arrived at his house, Lily smiled, not the polite, careful smile she reserved for adults, but a genuine, uninhibited grin. Someone was finally listening. She retrieved her tablet from where she had left it on the hallway table, her small fingers moving with surprising confidence across the screen. Alexander watched, fascinated despite his escalating anxiety, as she navigated through applications he didn't recognize. I learned this from watching you, she explained, pulling up a signal detection program. When you were working on the router configuration last month, I downloaded it to see what was making my room feel buzzy at night. The tablet screen blossomed with a detailed network map of their house. Alexander recognized his own devices: computers, phones, smart home systems, security cameras. But then there were others, unfamiliar signals that sent a shiver of dread down his spine. There, Lily pointed to a cluster of ominous red dots. These appeared after Victoria started visiting more often. This big one is behind your painting. This smaller one is in the living room, inside that crystal vase she brought you. And this one, she scrolled, revealing another cluster in the master bedroom, is in your nightstand. Alexander's world tilted on its axis. The woman he had been falling in love with, the woman he had been seriously considering proposing to, had systematically bugged his home. Every private conversation, every confidential business call, every intimate moment, all of it recorded and transmitted to unknown receivers. How long have you known? He asked, surprised by the steady control in his own voice. 3 weeks, Lily said quietly. I kept trying to tell you, but... She trailed off, but they both understood the unspoken reason for her hesitation. He had been too busy, Too consumed by work and by Victoria's intoxicating presence to pay attention to anything an 8-year-old might have to say. "Tell me about Victoria," he urged, his voice tight with a suppressed fury. "What have you seen her do?" Lily's expression grew serious, taking on that watchful quality he now realized signified an eidetic memory for details. Children who had endured the foster system learned to pay meticulous attention. Their very survival had once depended on accurately reading the subtle signs. "She comes here when you're not home sometimes," Lily began. "She has a key, but she always acts surprised when I see her, like she forgot I'd be here. She says she's cleaning or organizing, but she never actually cleans anything." Alexander's hands clenched into impotent fists. He had given Victoria a key 3 months ago, a gesture that had felt profoundly romantic and significant at the time. She had teared up, sheathing his hand in hers, whispering that no one had ever trusted her like that before. "She goes through your office," Lily continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "Not just looking around, but photographing things. She has this tiny camera, smaller than a phone. I saw her take pictures of papers on your desk, and she always puts them back exactly where they were." "What else?" "She asked me questions." Lily's voice grew even quieter, almost a whisper. "About your schedule, about when you work late, about your friends. She makes it seem like she's just being nice, trying to get to know me better. But foster kids learn to recognize when adults are fishing for information." The words struck Alexander like physical blows. Every casual conversation, every seemingly innocent question Victoria had posed about his work, his business relationships, his daily routines. It had all been meticulously gathered intelligence, and she had been using Lily, an 8-year-old child who had already been abandoned and betrayed by the very adults who were supposed to protect her, as an unwitting source. "There's something else," Lily said, her brown eyes meeting his directly. "I think someone else is helping her." "What do you mean?" "Ethan comes by sometimes when you're traveling. He and Victoria meet in your office. They whisper a lot and look at papers together. Last week, I heard him say something about making sure the timeline matches the product launch." Ethan Hayes, Alexander's chief financial officer and one of his oldest friends. They had built the company together from nothing, sharing dreams and struggles and hard-won victories. If Ethan was involved, Alexander's rational mind desperately tried to reject Lily's pronouncements. These were extraordinary accusations against people he trusted, people he had loved. But the evidence was mounting, irrefutable, and chilling. "Lily," he said carefully, "why didn't you just ask me about the devices? Why did you investigate on your own?" She looked down at her tablet, suddenly seeming very young and vulnerable. "Because adults don't usually believe kids, especially kids like me. And because," she paused, grappling with the difficult admission, "because I thought maybe you already knew. Maybe it was part of your security system, and I was being paranoid." The confession shattered something deep inside Alexander's chest. This brilliant, observant child had been carrying the crushing weight of this discovery alone for weeks, uncertain whether to trust her own perceptions or the adults around her. She had been protecting him, while simultaneously protecting herself from the inevitable disappointment of not being believed. "I believe you," he said firmly, his voice thick with unvoiced regret. "And I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." Lily's smile this time was radiant, a beacon of hope in the gathering gloom. "So, what do we do now?" For the first time in their 6 months together, Alexander looked at Lily as a partner, rather than a responsibility. Her insights had already proven more valuable than those of his entire security team. Her careful observation and innate technological aptitude had uncovered a sophisticated espionage operation that could have utterly destroyed everything he had built. "Now," he said, a steely resolve hardening his features, "we figure out exactly what they're after, and we stop them. Trust is earned in moments like these." The next morning arrived, gray and drizzling, mirroring the oppressive weight of secrets that now filled Alexander's house. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through implications and chilling possibilities, while Victoria slept peacefully beside him. Every breath she took felt like a calculated lie, every unconscious touch a profound betrayal. Lily found him in the kitchen at dawn, dark circles under his eyes as he mechanically stirred coffee he wouldn't drink. She was already dressed for school, her small backpack slung over her shoulder, but her expression suggested she hadn't slept any better than he had. "We need help," she stated without preamble, settling onto the bar stool across from him. "I've been thinking about it all night. If Ethan is involved, we can't trust anyone from your company. And if Victoria suspects we know, she might destroy evidence or disappear." Alexander marveled again at this child's astonishing clarity of thought. At 35, he had built a multi-million-dollar empire through strategic thinking and calculated risks. But Lily, at 8 years old and with no formal training in business or espionage, had immediately grasped the essential problem they faced. "Who do you suggest?" he asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "Eleanor," Lily said without hesitation. "She's been with your family since before you started the company. She sees everything that happens in this house, but people treat her like she's invisible. And," Lily paused, suddenly looking uncertain, "she's the only adult who's ever really listened to me here." Eleanor Vance had been the Sterling family's property manager for 15 years, ever since Alexander's parents had first hired her to maintain their sprawling estate. When they died in a tragic car accident 5 years ago, Alexander had kept her on, partly out of loyalty and partly because she ran his household with a quiet efficiency that freed him to focus entirely on his burgeoning business. At 69, Eleanor had witnessed 3 generations of Sterlings navigate their triumphs and their disasters. More importantly, as Lily had astutely noted, she was one of the few people who treated the 8-year-old like a person rather than a project. "Eleanor it is," Alexander decided. "Can you ask her to meet us in the library after school? Tell her it's important, but don't say why over the phone." Lily nodded solemnly, understanding the implications of operational security better than most adults. She slipped off the bar stool and headed toward the door, then turned back. "Alexander?" Her voice was smaller now, vulnerable in a way that reminded him she was still just a child carrying an enormous, terrifying burden. "What if we're wrong? What if Victoria really loves you, and there's some other explanation?" The question revealed both her profound intelligence and her deeply compassionate heart. Even after everything she had observed, even with the undeniable evidence she had gathered, Lily was still hoping she might be mistaken. She wanted the adults in her life to be trustworthy, wanted the family she had found to be real and safe. "Then we'll figure that out too," Alexander said gently, his voice firm. "But Lily, your instincts have been right about everything so far. Don't doubt yourself now." That afternoon, the 3 of them gathered in Alexander's home library, surrounded by shelves of books that represented decades of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. Eleanor listened without interruption as Lily and Alexander laid out their discoveries, her weathered hands folded calmly in her lap, her dark eyes sharp and alert behind wire-rimmed glasses. When they finished, she sat quietly for a long moment, processing everything they had told her. "I've been wondering about Miss Victoria for weeks," she said finally, her accented English precise as always. "Little things that didn't quite add up. She knew too much about your business schedules, seemed too interested in details about your friends and associates. And she has a way of watching people when she thinks they're not looking." "What kind of watching?" Alexander asked, leaning forward. "The kind that measures and calculates," Eleanor replied, her voice low and grave. "I've seen it before, in people who aren't what they pretend to be. She studies you, Mr. Alexander, studies this house, studies your routines. It's not the way someone in love observes their partner, it's the way someone gathers intelligence." Lily leaned forward eagerly. "You've noticed other things too, haven't you?" Eleanor smiled at the girl with genuine affection. "You see everything, don't you, little one?" "Yes, I've noticed other things. Phone calls she takes in her car after visiting, the way she's always here during important business calls, even when she claims to be busy elsewhere. And yesterday, I found her in your study at 6 in the morning, supposedly looking for a book." "At 6 a.m.? Alexander's voice sharpened, incredulous. "She said she couldn't sleep and wanted to borrow something to read," Eleanor confirmed. "But she was standing by your computer, not near the bookshelves, and she looked startled when I appeared." "Guilty." The 3 of them sat in heavy silence, as the crushing weight of accumulated evidence settled around them. Separately, each observation might have been explained away. Together, they painted a chilling picture of systematic deception and surveillance. "So what's our next move?" Eleanor asked, and Alexander realized she had automatically positioned herself as an integral part of their nascent team. This elegant, dignified woman, who had spent decades managing households and safeguarding family secrets, was ready to help them expose a conspiracy that threatened everything they held dear. "We need proof," Alexander said, his voice firm. "Real evidence that will hold up if this goes to court or gets reported to the authorities. And we need to find out who she's working for and what they're really after." "I can help with that," Lily said quietly. "The surveillance devices she planted, they work both ways. If I can access their signals, I might be able to trace where they're transmitting to, maybe even intercept what they're sending." Both adults stared at her in stunned amazement. This 8-year-old girl was proposing to conduct counter-surveillance operations that would challenge experienced intelligence professionals. "Where did you learn to do that?" Eleanor asked gently, her voice tinged with wonder. Lily shrugged, suddenly looking embarrassed. "I read a lot, and I watch you work," she said to Alexander. "Your cybersecurity programs aren't that different from the apps kids use to monitor network traffic for gaming. I just adapted them." Alexander felt a surge of something that might have been pride, followed immediately by a fierce protective worry. Lily's capabilities were remarkable, but she was still a child who had already been through too much. The last thing he wanted was to put her in danger. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "This is getting too dangerous for you to be involved." Lily's expression shifted, her eyes flashing with the stubborn determination he was beginning to recognize as purely her own. "I'm already involved. I'm the one who discovered this, and I'm the only one who's been successfully watching them without being detected." "She's right," Eleanor said quietly, her voice resonating with authority. "And more than that, she's been keeping herself safe in this house for months while observing things the rest of us missed." "Lily isn't just smart, Mr. Alexander. She's careful. She survives situations that would break most adults." Alexander looked between these two extraordinary females, who had somehow become his most trusted allies in the space of 24 hours. An 8-year-old girl with the observational skills of a trained spy and the moral clarity of someone who had learned to distinguish truth from deception through sheer necessity. And a 69-year-old woman who had spent decades watching and protecting, who understood loyalty and recognized threats with the wisdom of experience. "All right," he said finally, a deep sigh escaping him. "But we do this together. No one takes risks alone. We watch out for each other." Lily's smile lit up the room, radiant and unreserved. "So we're like a real family now?" The question caught Alexander off guard with its simple, direct earnestness. Family. Not the arrangement of convenience and obligation he thought he was providing, but something real and chosen and mutual. "Yes," he said, and meant it completely, with a certainty that resonated through his very core. "We're like a real family now." 3 days later, their carefully laid plans collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Alexander stood in his office, holding the tiny surveillance device Eleanor had meticulously extracted from behind Victoria's painting, while his world tilted on its axis. The evidence was undeniable now. A sophisticated piece of equipment worth thousands of dollars, broadcasting on encrypted frequencies to receivers they had traced to a location downtown. But when he had confronted Victoria with it an hour ago, expecting guilt or a confession, or at least surprise, she had looked at him with such genuine confusion and hurt that he had begun to doubt everything. "You think I'm spying on you?" she had whispered, tears gathering in her emerald eyes. "Alexander, how could you even imagine I'd do something like that?" Her reaction had been so perfect, so utterly believable, that for a fleeting moment he had wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. Victoria was an actress by training, he reminded himself, a media expert who understood exactly how to manipulate emotions and perceptions. But the raw pain in her eyes had seemed so real. "Maybe there's another explanation," he had found himself saying, hating the uncertainty that laced his own voice. "Maybe someone else planted these devices, someone trying to frame you or destroy our relationship." Victoria had thrown herself into his arms then, sobbing against his chest. whispering about how scared she was that someone was targeting them, how grateful she was that he was willing to consider her innocence. And that's when Lily had walked into the room. The 8-year-old had taken one look at the scene, Victoria crying in Alexander's arms, the incriminating surveillance device abandoned on his desk, and her face had gone completely blank. Not hurt or disappointed, but empty, shut down. It was an expression Alexander recognized from their first few weeks together, when she had still been braced for rejection and abandonment. "Lily, sweetheart," he had started, but she had turned and walked away without a word. Now, an hour later, he couldn't find her anywhere in the house. Eleanor was searching the grounds while he combed through every room, calling her name, growing more frantic with each empty space. He found her finally in the last place he thought to look, the small storage room behind the garage where they kept holiday decorations and forgotten furniture. She was curled up behind a stack of boxes, her tablet clutched against her chest, her face streaked with tears she had tried to wipe away. "Lily," he sank down beside her, his heart aching at the sheer defeat in her small frame. "Talk to me, sweetheart." "You don't believe me," she said quietly, not looking at him. "I showed you everything. I explained everything. But you still choose her." "That's not true," he insisted, his voice raw. "I do believe you. The evidence is overwhelming." "Then why is she still here?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through him like a blade. "Why are you letting her cry on you and tell you she's innocent when we both know she's lying?" Alexander had no answer for that. Or rather, he had an answer he didn't want to admit. Despite everything they had discovered, despite the surveillance equipment and the documented deception, part of him still desperately wanted to believe Victoria was innocent. Part of him was still susceptible to her tears and her explanations, and the intoxicating, albeit impossible possibility that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. "Adults are complicated," he said lamely. "Sometimes we want things to be true, even when we know they're not." Lily finally looked at him, and the disappointment in her brown eyes was devastating. "I thought you were different. I thought you actually listened." "I am listening. I did listen." "No," she said, with the terrible clarity of a child who had been let down too many times. "You listened to what I said, but you didn't believe it was more important than what you wanted, just like all the other adults." She was right, and they both knew it. Alexander had spent his entire adult life making hard decisions based on cold evidence and unyielding logic, cutting ties with people who threatened his business or betrayed his trust. But when it came to Victoria, when it came to his own emotional needs and desires, he had wavered. He had allowed doubt to creep in, not because the evidence was weak, but because accepting it would mean losing something he desperately wanted to keep. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice filled with a profound regret. "You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry." Lily studied his face with those wise, old-soul eyes. "Are you sorry enough to do something about it?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, Victoria is still in our house right now, probably planting more devices or stealing more information while we're out here talking. I mean, Ethan is probably getting a report from her tonight about how successfully she handled your suspicions. I mean, they're going to keep doing this until they get whatever they came for, and then they'll disappear and leave us with nothing." Alexander felt something shift inside his chest, a hardening of resolve that reminded him why he had been so successful in business for so long. Lily was right. While he had been wrestling with his emotions and hoping for impossible explanations, the people who had betrayed them were probably making their final, decisive moves. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice now devoid of hesitation. "I need you to trust me," Lily said simply. "Not just believe me, but actually trust me enough to let me help catch them. I've been working on something while you were figuring things out." She opened her tablet and showed him a screen full of data streams and network traffic that looked like something from his own cybersecurity programs. "I've been monitoring their communications for the past 3 days. They're planning something big for tomorrow night. Something called final extraction that involves your prototype algorithm." "How do you know all this?" "Because I hacked their surveillance system," Lily said matter-of-factly. "The same way they've been watching us, I've been watching them." "And Alexander," her voice grew harder, more determined than any 8-year-old should ever need to be. They're not just stealing your algorithm. They're planning to destroy your reputation by making it look like you sold it voluntarily. Ethan has been preparing documents that make you look like a willing collaborator. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with crystalline clarity. This wasn't just industrial espionage. It was character assassination, meticulously designed to utterly destroy him while enriching his enemies. And he had almost let it happen because he had been too emotionally compromised to trust the one person who had been trying to save him. Alexander looked at this remarkable child who had been abandoned by multiple families, who had learned to read deception and betrayal in adult faces as a crucial survival skill, who had used her pain and experience to develop instincts that had already saved him once. "I trust you," he said, and this time he meant it completely, with every fiber of his being. "What's the plan?" Lily's smile was fierce and determined. "We're going to give them exactly what they want, and when they take it, we're going to be ready." The truth arrived in fragments over the next 18 hours, each piece more damning than the last. Eleanor found the first breakthrough while meticulously sorting through financial records. She had quietly been investigating Ethan Hayes, Alexander's trusted CFO and supposed best friend. Ethan had received 3 separate wire transfers totaling $200,000 over the past 6 months. The money had originated from shell companies ultimately traced back to Nexus Innovations, Alexander's biggest competitor in the cybersecurity market. "He's been selling you out from the beginning," Eleanor told Alexander grimly as they huddled around her laptop in the library. "Every business strategy, every client meeting, every product development timeline, he's had access to all of it." But it was Lily who uncovered the astonishing scope of their betrayal, using techniques that impressed even Alexander's professional paranoia. She had managed to decrypt significant portions of the communications between Victoria and her handlers. What they revealed was a conspiracy more sophisticated and cold-blooded than any of them had imagined. "Look at this," Lily said, pulling up intercepted text messages on her tablet. "Victoria isn't just some corporate spy they hired. She's been working for Nexus for 3 years, specializing in what they call intimate infiltration of target executives." Alexander's blood turned to ice as he read over her shoulder. The messages discussed Victoria's previous assignments: a defense contractor in D.C., a pharmaceutical executive in Boston, a tech startup founder in Seattle. All men, all successful, all subsequently destroyed when their trade secrets were stolen and their companies collapsed under mysterious scandals. "She's done this before," he said numbly. "Multiple times." "It gets worse," Lily continued, scrolling through more intercepted data. "They've been planning your destruction for almost a year. Ethan gave them your psychological profile, your relationship history, even details about your parents' death. They designed Victoria's entire persona specifically to appeal to you." The casual cruelty of it stole Alexander's breath. Every moment of their relationship had been meticulously calculated. Her feigned interest in technology, her exaggerated admiration for his work, her tears when he'd given her the house key, all of it scripted and performed by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a target to be exploited. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. "Tonight's extraction isn't just about stealing your prototype," Lily said, her young voice heavy with an understanding far beyond her years. "They're going to frame you for corporate espionage. Ethan has been creating a paper trail that makes it look like you've been selling secrets to foreign competitors for months. When the FBI raids your office tomorrow, they'll find evidence that you're a traitor to your own country." "What evidence?" Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Forged documents in your handwriting, bank accounts opened in your name with suspicious deposits, communications with overseas buyers that look real enough to fool investigators." Lily's eyes met his directly, unwavering. "They're not just stealing from you, Alexander. They're going to destroy your life so completely that even if you prove your innocence eventually, no one will ever trust you again." Alexander sat in stunned silence as the full magnitude of the trap became horrifyingly clear. His business would be ruined, his reputation would be irrevocably destroyed. He'd likely face federal charges that could put him in prison for decades. And worst of all, Lily would be left alone again, Returned to the foster system because her adoptive father was a convicted criminal. Why? He asked finally, his voice hoarse. Why go to such extremes? The algorithm is valuable, but not worth this level of risk and complexity. Because it's not just about the algorithm, Eleanor said quietly. She'd been reading through more of the intercepted communications, her face grave. Nexus Innovations is planning a hostile takeover of your entire company. With you disgraced and facing criminal charges, your stock price will collapse. They'll be able to buy controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. It's brilliant in a horrible way, Lily added with the analytical clarity that never failed to amaze him. They get your technology, your company, your market share, and your client base, all for the cost of bribing one employee and hiring one very skilled actress. Alexander looked around the library at these two extraordinary people who had become his family in the most unlikely way possible. Eleanor, whose unwavering loyalty and profound wisdom had sustained him through tragedy and triumph. Lily, whose courage and incredible insight had saved him from a destruction he'd never seen coming. They were depending on him to protect them, and he'd almost failed them completely. Not if we stop them first, he said, his voice carrying the hard, unyielding edge of determination that had built his empire from nothing. Eleanor, can you get us copies of everything Ethan has been falsifying? I want to know exactly what evidence they're planning to plant. Already working on it, she replied with a smile that was pure steel. I've been his assistant for 5 years. I know where he keeps everything. And Lily, Alexander turned to the 8-year-old who had somehow become his most valuable ally. How much can you intercept of their communications without them detecting you? All of it, she said confidently. They're using encrypted channels, but they're not expecting to be monitored by their own surveillance equipment. I can see every message, every plan, every backup strategy they've prepared. Then here's what we're going to do, Alexander said, feeling the familiar thrill of a complex chess game where he finally understood his opponent's strategy. We're going to let them execute their plan exactly as they've designed it. But when they reach for the prize, they're going to find we've set a trap of our own. What kind of trap? Lily asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. Alexander's smile was sharp as a blade. The kind that turns predators into prey. Tomorrow night, when they think they're destroying me, we're going to destroy them instead. And we're going to make sure the whole world knows exactly what they tried to do. For the first time since this nightmare began, Alexander felt like himself again. Not the love-struck fool who'd been manipulated by a beautiful woman, not the betrayed friend who'd been sold out by his business partner, but the strategic thinker who'd built something from nothing and wasn't about to let anyone take it away. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next evening arrived with the palpable weight of destiny hanging in the air, like storm clouds before a lightning strike. Alexander's house, which had been a home filled with warmth and growing trust just days ago, now felt like a stage set for the final act of an elaborate drama, where everything, his future, his freedom, his newly found family, hung precariously in the balance. Victoria moved through the house with her usual practiced grace, preparing for what she believed would be her final, triumphant performance. She had spent the day playing the concerned girlfriend perfectly, asking worried questions about his stress levels, suggesting they have a quiet dinner at home to help him relax before his big product launch tomorrow. She had no idea that every word she spoke was being recorded, every move she made was being monitored, and every electronic signal from her hidden communication devices was being intercepted and decoded by an 8-year-old girl who had learned espionage out of sheer necessity and refined it through pure, unyielding determination. The extraction begins at 11 p.m., Lily whispered to Alexander as they passed in the hallway, their faces betraying no hint of their true purpose. Ethan will create a distraction by triggering the fire alarm at your office building while security is focused on that. Victoria will download the final algorithm files and transmit them to the overseas buyers. And the frame job is already in motion. The FBI has received an anonymous tip about suspicious activity in your accounts. They're planning to raid your office at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, just after the technology transfer is complete. Alexander marveled again at the chilling sophistication of their enemies' planning. Every detail had been meticulously orchestrated to ensure maximum damage with minimal risk to themselves. If Lily hadn't detected their surveillance, if she hadn't trusted her instincts and kept investigating, despite being dismissed by adults, the trap would have been perfect. But they had detected it, and now the hunters were about to discover they had been hunting something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. At 10:30 p.m., Alexander made his move. "I'm going to check on some files at the office," he announced to Victoria, who was curled up on the couch with a book, the picture of domestic contentment. "I know it's late, but I want to review everything one more time before tomorrow's presentation." Victoria's eyes flickered just for an instant with something that might have been excitement. "Of course, darling. You know how important this is. I'll just stay here and finish my book." "Actually," Alexander said, as if the thought had just occurred to him, "why don't you come with me? I could use the company, and you always make me feel more confident." For a split second, Victoria's mask slipped. Alexander caught a glimpse of raw calculation behind her loving smile, the rapid mental adjustment as she weighed the implications of this unexpected invitation. "I'd love to," she said finally, her voice perfectly modulated, "but I'm feeling a bit tired. Besides, you work better when you're not distracted by me." She accompanied this with the sultry smile that had captivated him for months. "You're probably right," Alexander agreed, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I'll be back in a few hours." He left through the front door, making sure she heard his car start and drive away. But instead of going to his office, he circled back through the woods behind his property and slipped into the house through the basement entrance Eleanor had left unlocked for him. From the hidden observation post they'd set up in the unused maid's quarters, Alexander, Lily, and Eleanor watched Victoria spring into action with the chilling efficiency of a trained operative. The moment she was certain Alexander was gone, her entire demeanor changed. The soft, loving girlfriend disappeared, replaced by a focused professional who moved with predatory purpose. She retrieved a sophisticated laptop from a hiding place she'd created in the guest bathroom, connected it to Alexander's home network, and began what was clearly a well-rehearsed process of data infiltration. "She's good," Lily whispered admiringly, her eyes glued to the screen. "Watch how she's bypassing the security protocols. She must have been studying your system for months." "Not good enough," Alexander replied grimly. "She's downloading from the decoy server we set up this afternoon. Every file she's stealing is either worthless or contains tracking malware that will lead us straight to her buyers." Meanwhile, Eleanor monitored communications from Ethan, who was indeed at Alexander's office building, preparing to trigger the fire alarm that would provide cover for Victoria's activities. His text messages to his Nexus handlers revealed a man convinced he was about to become wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. At 11:15 p.m., everything went according to the conspirators' plan. The fire alarm at Alexander's office building created chaos as security teams responded to what appeared to be a genuine emergency. Victoria completed her download and began transmitting the stolen files to encrypted servers overseas. Ethan prepared to plant the forged evidence that would frame Alexander for treason. What they didn't know was that every step of their operation was being broadcast live to a secure government server, where federal agents were recording everything for what would become the most comprehensive case of corporate espionage in recent history. At 11:45 p.m., Victoria received the text message she'd been waiting for. "Package delivered. Initiate Phase 2. Phase 2 was the destruction of evidence and her own disappearance. Within minutes, she would delete all traces of her activities, plant the final pieces of incriminating evidence against Alexander, and vanish forever. By tomorrow morning, she'd be on a plane to a non-extradition country with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. Instead, she found herself looking into the faces of Alexander, Lily, and Eleanor as they emerged from their hiding place. "Hello, Victoria," Alexander said calmly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Or should I call you by your real name? Serena Jones, age 31, wanted by the FBI for industrial espionage in 4 states." The transformation was instantaneous and chilling. The woman who'd spent months convincing him she loved him disappeared completely, replaced by someone whose eyes held nothing but cold, calculating rage. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," she said, her voice carrying an entirely different accent now, a harsh, clipped tone. "This is bigger than your little company, bigger than your naive understanding of how the world really works. You're right, Alexander agreed, a faint, dangerous smile playing on his lips. It is bigger than I understood. That's why the FBI has been recording everything for the past 6 hours. That's why your buyers overseas are actually federal agents conducting a sting operation. And that's why Ethan is currently being arrested at my office building. Victoria's face went bone white as the full scope of their counter-operation became horrifyingly clear. Impossible! We monitored everything. We controlled every variable. You controlled every variable, Lily said, stepping forward with the quiet confidence of someone who'd outmaneuvered adults far more experienced than herself. Except one. You never considered that an 8-year-old foster kid might be smarter than your entire operation. The look Victoria turned on Lily was pure, unadulterated venom. You little... I wouldn't finish that sentence, Alexander interrupted, his voice carrying a warning that made Victoria take an involuntary step backward. You're talking to the person who saved my life and exposed your entire criminal network. Show some respect. Outside, the sound of sirens grew louder as federal agents surrounded the house. The trap that had taken months to set was finally springing shut, not on Alexander, but on the people who'd tried to destroy him. Justice, Alexander reflected, sometimes came in the most unexpected packages. 6 weeks later, Alexander Sterling stood in the courthouse lobby, watching Ethan Hayes being led away in handcuffs. His former CFO and supposed best friend now faced federal charges that would likely keep him imprisoned for the next 20 years. The man who'd helped him build his company from nothing, who'd shared dreams and struggles, and what Alexander had believed was genuine friendship, had looked right through him as if he were a stranger. Betrayal, Alexander had learned, left scars that went deeper than any physical wound. But healing, he was discovering, could come from the most unexpected sources. He looked smaller than I remembered, Lily observed quietly from beside him. At 8 years old, she had become the star witness in a federal investigation that had unraveled a corporate espionage network spanning multiple industries and several countries. Her testimony had been so clear, so detailed, and so technologically sophisticated that prosecutors were calling it the most compelling evidence they'd ever presented. People usually do when you see them clearly, Eleanor replied, adjusting Lily's new dress. The formal adoption proceedings had concluded an hour ago, and Lily Vance was now officially, legally, and permanently part of their family. Alexander looked down at the adoption certificate in his hands, the legal document that meant far less than the emotional truth they'd all discovered over the past 2 months. Family wasn't about paperwork or blood relations or good intentions. It was about choosing to stand together when the world tried to tear you apart. It was about trust earned through crisis and love proven through action. So what happens now, Lily asked, slipping her small hand into his. The gesture was natural now, comfortable in a way that spoke of security and belonging, rather than politeness or duty. Now we go home, Alexander said simply. To our home. The house felt different when they walked through the front door that evening. The surveillance equipment had been removed. The hidden cameras and listening devices that had turned their sanctuary into a stage for deception were gone. But more than that, the very air felt cleaner, more honest, in a way it hadn't been since Victoria had first crossed the threshold with her calculated smiles and scripted affection. They'd redecorated together over the past few weeks, the three of them choosing new furniture and colors and artwork that reflected who they actually were, rather than who they thought they should be. Lily's vibrant drawings now hung in frames alongside expensive paintings. Eleanor's cherished family photos had places of honor on the mantelpiece. The house had become a home in every sense that mattered. I have something for you, Alexander told Lily as they settled in the living room with hot chocolate in the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to perform for each other. He handed her a small wrapped box, watching as her eyes widened with the unadulterated delight of a child who was still learning that good surprises were possible in her life. Inside was a device that looked like a sophisticated smartphone, but was actually something far more special. A prototype security scanner Alexander had been developing specifically for her, incorporating all the techniques she'd used to detect the surveillance equipment that had saved them both. It's yours, he said. Your own invention, based on your innovations. I filed the patents in your name. Lily stared at the device, then at him, her brown eyes filling with unshed tears. Mine? Really mine? Really yours? You're the youngest patent holder in the history of cybersecurity technology. And when you turn 18, the licensing fees will have generated enough money to pay for any college you want to attend. But it wasn't the financial implications that made Lily cry. It was the recognition, the profound acknowledgement that her contributions had been real, invaluable, and worthy of protection. For a child who'd spent years being dismissed and overlooked, having her innovations legally recognized and protected was validation of the deepest kind. There's something else, Eleanor said gently, producing an official-looking envelope from her purse. This came today. Inside was a letter from the FBI's Cybercrime Division, formally thanking Lily for her invaluable assistance in breaking up what they were calling one of the most sophisticated industrial espionage rings in American history. They were recommending her for a civilian commendation, an honor that would become part of her permanent record and a lasting testament to her courage and capability. They want to know if you'd be interested in consulting work when you're older, Alexander explained, a proud smile gracing his lips. Apparently, your methods impressed some very important people in Washington. He looked at the letter, then at the two adults who'd become her chosen family, and smiled with pure happiness. Will you help me write back to them? Of course, Alexander said. We'll do it together. Everything together from now on. As evening settled around them, they talked about practical things, school schedules and vacation plans, and the security upgrades they wanted to install now that they understood how vulnerable their previous systems had been. But underneath the ordinary domestic conversations ran a deeper, stronger current of connection and commitment. They'd been tested by betrayal and conspiracy, by people who'd tried to use their trust against them and their love as a weapon for destruction. They'd survived, not just intact, but stronger, bound together by crisis in ways that good times alone could never have achieved. I love you both, Lily said, as Eleanor tucked her into bed that night. The words spoken with the simple directness of someone who no longer feared that love was temporary or conditional. We love you too, darling, Eleanor replied, kissing her forehead. Forever and always. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching this bedtime ritual that had become precious to him, thinking about how completely his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been a successful but lonely man who'd adopted a child out of a sense of obligation and social responsibility. Tonight, he was part of a family that had chosen each other through trial by fire and emerged stronger than he'd ever imagined possible. Love, he'd learned, wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you did every day through the small acts of attention and care that said, "You're important to me. You matter. Your voice is heard." And trust, real trust, wasn't given blindly. It was earned through consistency, proven through crisis, and honored through the choice to keep choosing each other, even when it was difficult. As he turned off the lights and headed to his own room, Alexander reflected on the profound lesson he'd never expected to learn from an 8-year-old girl. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths, and the people you least expect to save, you turn out to be exactly the family you never knew you needed. 1 year later, Alexander Sterling stood at the window of his home office, the very room where a small girl had once whispered words that changed everything. Watching Lily install security software on Eleanor's laptop with the patient expertise of someone who'd found her calling early in life. The sun streamed through windows that now held no secrets, illuminating a space that had been transformed from a target for espionage into a sanctuary for innovation. The walls displayed framed articles about their remarkable story, including a feature in Forbes about the 8-year-old who revolutionized corporate security and a piece in People magazine titled "The Family That Fought Back." But the most treasured item in the room was a simple handwritten note from Lily, framed on his desk. "Thank you for finally listening. Love, your daughter." Your daughter. Not adopted daughter, not foster daughter, just daughter. The distinction mattered in ways that legal documents could never capture. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Eleanor asked from the doorway, her voice carrying the gentle concern of someone who'd watched him rebuild his life from the ground up over the past year. Alexander nodded, looking at the calendar on his desk. Today marked exactly 1 year since Victoria's arrest, 1 year since the federal raids that had exposed the Nexus Innovations conspiracy, 1 year since their family had been forged in the fire of betrayal and emerged stronger than ever. It was also the day he'd chosen to make an announcement that would change everything again. Ladies, he said, gathering his courage in the way he'd learned to do over the past year, not by shutting down his emotions, but by acknowledging them and moving forward anyway. I have something important to tell you both. Lily looked up from the laptop, her brown eyes bright with curiosity. At 9 years old, she'd grown taller, more confident, but she still possessed the watchful intelligence that had saved them all. The difference now was that her vigilance came from strength rather than fear, from the security of knowing she was wanted and valued, rather than the terror of potential abandonment. I've decided to step back from day-to-day operations at the company, Alexander continued. I'm promoting Sarah Davies to CEO, and I'm going to focus on research and development. Specifically, I want to work on technology that helps protect families like ours. Eleanor smiled knowingly. You're going to build better security systems for homes, among other things. But more importantly, Alexander added, his voice heartfelt, I want to be present for this family in ways I wasn't before. I want to be the kind of father who hears what his daughter is trying to tell him the first time she says it, not the 20th. Lily's face lit up with pure joy. Does this mean you'll have time to help me with the new scanner prototype? It means I'll have time for whatever matters to you, Alexander replied, his eyes twinkling. School projects, science fairs, teaching you to drive when you're old enough, scaring away boys when you start dating in about 20 years. 20 years, Miss Lily laughed, a bright, clear sound. That seems excessive. 30 years then. I'm flexible. Eleanor shook her head with fond exasperation. Men always thinking they can control timing when it comes to matters of the heart. But her eyes held deep approval as she watched the easy banter between father and daughter. This was what she'd hoped for when she'd first encouraged Alexander to truly listen to Lily. Not just the resolution of a crisis, but the building of a genuine relationship that would sustain them through all the ordinary challenges and joys that lay ahead. There's something else, Alexander said, his tone growing more serious. I've been thinking about what we learned this year, about how easy it is for people to be fooled by those who prey on trust and loneliness. I want to do something about that. He pulled out a meticulously detailed business plan he'd been working on for months, pages of proposals and financial projections for something entirely new. I want to start a foundation, he explained, an organization that helps people who've been targeted by confidence schemes, romance scams, corporate espionage. I want to provide resources for victims, training for law enforcement, and education programs that teach people to recognize the warning signs. What would you call it? Lily asked, already scanning through the proposal with the rapid comprehension that never failed to amaze him. The Lily Vance Foundation, Alexander said simply, his gaze tender. Named after the person who taught me that wisdom doesn't come from age or experience alone. It comes from paying attention to the truth, even when that truth is inconvenient or painful. Lily stared at him, speechless for one of the few times in their relationship. The idea that her name would be associated with helping others, that her experience and insights would be used to protect people from the kind of deception they'd faced, clearly overwhelmed her in the best possible way. I think, Eleanor said quietly, that sounds like exactly the right way to honor what you've all learned. Over the following months, as the foundation took shape and began its vital work, Alexander discovered that the lessons Lily had taught him extended far beyond cybersecurity and corporate espionage. She'd shown him that listening, really listening, to the people you love was the foundation of every meaningful relationship. That trust wasn't something you gave automatically, but something you built through consistent actions over time. That family wasn't about who shared your DNA, but about who chose to stand beside you when life tried to knock you down. Most importantly, she taught him that some of the most important truths come from the smallest voices, the children, the overlooked, the underestimated, who see clearly because they haven't yet learned to doubt their own perceptions in favor of what others expect them to believe. On the first anniversary of the Lily Vance Foundation, they received a heartfelt letter from a woman in Ohio whose elderly mother had been saved from a romance scam by information she'd learned from their educational programs. The would-be victim had recognized the warning signs and contacted authorities instead of sending money to someone who claimed to love her but had never met her in person. "One more family safe," Lily said softly as she read the letter aloud during dinner that night. "One more person who listened to that little voice inside that says something's not right." "Speaking of little voices," Alexander said, a warm smile spreading across his face, "what is yours telling you about your future? You're getting older, developing your own dreams and goals. What do you want to do with all that brilliance of yours?" Lily considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "I want to keep learning about technology, about people, about how to protect the things that matter, and I want to help other kids who don't have families yet find theirs, the way I found mine." "That sounds like a perfect plan," Eleanor said warmly, "and you'll always have us to support you, whatever you decide." As they cleared the dinner dishes together, a cherished family ritual that had become precious to all of them, Alexander reflected on how completely his understanding of success had changed. A year ago, he'd measured his worth by profit margins and market share, by the size of his bank account and the recognition of his peers. Now he measured it by Lily's laughter, by Eleanor's quiet contentment, by the profound knowledge that they'd built something real and lasting together. He measured it by the families they'd helped through the foundation, by the young people who'd learned to trust their instincts because of Lily's inspiring example, by the simple but profound satisfaction of living a life aligned with his deepest values. That night, as he tucked Lily into bed, a ritual she still treasured despite her growing independence, she looked up at him with those wise brown eyes that had seen too much too early, but had never lost their capacity for hope. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what, sweetheart?" "For listening, for believing me, for becoming the kind of father who hears what his daughter is trying to tell him." Alexander kissed her forehead, his heart full of overflowing gratitude for the child who taught him that the most important conversations often begin with whispers, and that the smallest voices sometimes carry the greatest wisdom. "Thank you," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion, "for teaching me how to listen." Outside, the world continued its complex dance of joy and sorrow, triumph and betrayal, connection and loss. But inside their home, three people who'd chosen each other slept peacefully, protected not just by sophisticated security systems, but by the deeper security of being known, valued, and loved exactly as they were. And in the morning, they would wake up together, ready to face whatever challenges came their way, secure in the knowledge that some families are built through crisis and strengthened through choice, and that the most powerful force in the world is a small voice speaking truth to those wise enough to listen. Your voice matters, no matter how small it might seem. Your instincts are valuable, your observations important, your truth worth sharing. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that they're seen, heard, and valued. Like this video if you believe in the power of chosen family, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the strength found in unexpected places.